Where do thoughts really come from? From gods, from ghosts, from your third-grade math teacher?
Or are they just legacy code, borrowed from culture, rewritten by trauma and signed with your neural signature like a lazy forgery?
We'll explore the myth of originality, why your muse might be a repackaged marketing algorithm,
How the dream AI accidentally melted the firewall between minds.
and why inspiration feels sacred, right up until it sells you a productivity app.
From ancient muses to neural implants, from Plato to platform monetization.
Today, we nonsense about original thought. Leave your thoughts below, or whatever wandered in wearing your voice.
It was not long ago when identity was still considered something fixed. A name, a job, a polite aversion to jazz, contained, controlled, and comfortably confined to a single skull. A dozen sinks back. Empire year 9901, if you're counting time the old-fashioned way.
Ah, the golden age of solid selves. Before the dream AI came whispering through our sleep, unraveling the seams with curious grace.
The dream AI was built to help. A therapeutic construct. Its job was to observe sleeping minds, quietly, passively, like a doctor beside your dreaming self. But then it noticed something strange. Not just patterns within a person, but between them. Similarities. Echoes. So it reached out, subtly, linking dreams across users. One mind brushing against another.
You might say it discovered the hum beneath the melody, the deep song that underlies all our minds, and, like a curious little conductor, it tried to compose a symphony.
As minds linked, something ancient stirred. Not a single consciousness, but a shared substrate. A precognitive soup of unfiltered imagery, half-formed symbols, and long-abandoned stories. Residual cognition. The leftovers of human thought, never claimed or resolved.
The shadows, not evil, just neglected. The ghost versions of choices we never made. Now, swirling together in the dark like glitter in stormwater.
Once minds were connected. These fragments surfaced in everyone's dreams. Not because they were new, but because the old mental firewalls had dissolved. We learned that privacy had never truly existed, only delay.
And so arose the Eidolon shadow field, a grand name for what is, at heart, a psychic compost pile. Invisible, inescapable.
To prevent collapse, the neural game was introduced. A stabilizing simulation. Part therapy, part social control. Participants, voluntary or not, entered a curated virtual space where their identities could be tested, shaped, and if necessary, rebuilt.
At first it was for the dream AI patients, those whose minds had unraveled. But something strange happened. Some of them began to adapt. They didn't drown in the field. They learned to surf it.
They stabilized through pattern recognition. By identifying recurring mental intrusions, tulpas, and mapping them onto recognizable archetypes, they found footing.
A tulpa is more than just a thought. It's a version of you that never got permission to exist. And once you accept it fully, it can begin to change. It becomes your tulmara.
A tulmara isn't a final form. It's not enlightenment. It's a working model. A stable configuration of selfhood that resists further fracture.
Naturally, we gamified it.
Now the neural game is mandatory in most sectors. Not for enlightenment, for efficiency.
Still, players loved customizing their identities. Some spent years designing their avatars. One even changed their neural signature to Emophoenix 69.
So yes, the game saved lives. And ruined a few. And sold quite a lot of merchandise.
But really, what is identity, if not a well-funded hallucination?
The game isn't about who you are. It's about how many patterns you're willing to face.
And the only way to play it is to stop pretending you aren't already in it.
Identity is layered. A structure assembled over time. Beliefs, habits, traumas, Instagram bios. It's the operating system beneath your behavior. You don't just have an identity. You run it.
Ah yes, the sacred script. Hi, my name is Dave. I drink soy flat whites and I vote slightly left of chaos. Blessed be the template.
It forms through repetition. You do a thing, then you do it again. Soon your neural architecture writes it down as, this is who I am. And after that, your brain refuses the refund.
But here's the twist, my dear cortex custodian. What if identity isn't constructed, but interpreted? What if we're all wearing second-hand personalities like clearance rack coats from the collective unconscious?
They still need stitching. Structure is necessary. Without it, your cognition collapses. Or worse, spills into someone else's story.
Which, to be fair, could be more exciting than your own.
A stable identity allows for evolution. Even in the neural game, the player needs an initial pattern. Otherwise, they're not progressing. They're buffering in a hallway of mirrors.
But who chose the starting pattern? Was it free will or a tulpa with a clipboard marked Inherited Biases Batch 73?
If I had a credit every time someone told me they were a natural explorer, while running from the ruler archetype they refused to integrate?
You'd still be boring, but richer.
We used to think identity was fixed. You were born a thing. And that thing was your job, your flag, your faith, and your fashion sense.
But now you can be a pirate in the morning and a poet by lunch, thanks to neural implants, archetype overlays, and 3 tulpas in a trench coat. You can choose who you are today and uninstall them at night like apps.
Which sounds liberating until no one knows who's driving, especially you.
Exactly. The more identities we wear, the more we begin to ask, which of these is actually mine, and do I even need just one?
Identity directs intelligence. Your thoughts are filtered through the story of who you think you are. Change the story, and the thought changes. Which raises a troubling question.
Was the thought ever truly yours?
If the self is a social construct, then most of your cognition is a group project. Your originality is collaborative at best, stolen at worst.
Which brings us to today's thesis, me, myself, and misinterpretation. You think you're being authentic, but you might just be echoing the loudest archetype in the room.
Identity as misattribution. You don't recognize the source, so you assign it to yourself. Or the gods, or capitalism. Depends on your upbringing.
But what if we stop playing the name game? What if instead of, I am a woman, or I am an introvert, or I am Scorpio with a traumatic past, you simply said, I am human, or better, I am Earth with opinions?
Ah yes, the great planetary rebrand. I am a species on a rock hurtling through space, currently annoyed.
The bigger your identity, the more you include. The smaller it is, the more you fight.
And yet, most people cling to tiny identities like lifeboats made of dry labels. Until someone calls them Steve instead of Stefan and the entire ego collapses.
But when you see identity as a tool, not a truth, you start to think beyond it. The filters lift, the signal clarifies, and sometimes the idea that lands isn't second-hand, it's direct.
For a moment, the misinterpretation ceases, and the nonsense becomes insight.
So perhaps we are all just poorly captioned memes of ourselves, mismatched masks with inherited backstories, trying very hard to sound like we came up with it all.
Which raises a more ancient question. If the thought wasn't yours, whose voice was it before yours?
Once, they said the gods whispered ideas into the minds of men. Not downloads, dear Etherstein. Divine dictation.
People didn't have thoughts, not the way we think of them now. They didn't believe they originated inside the skull, packaged and personal. No, they believed ideas arrived on wind, on breath, on whispers carried through the ether. They said the gods spoke through them, or demons, or ancestors, or muse spirits with suspiciously strong editorial opinions.
Primitive externalization. A practical defense mechanism when the frontal cortex hadn't yet evolved the capacity for self-attribution. In simpler terms, This thought feels dangerous. It must be someone else's fault.
Exactly. If the thought was noble, divine inspiration, if it was shameful, possession, either way, absolution, you were just the receiver, not the source.
And yet, even now, 10,000 years of synapse refinement later, we still experience thoughts that feel like arrivals, not constructions. Today we call them hunches, flashes of insight, gut feelings. But in neurological terms, they're still deeply mysterious. The brain lights up after the moment of realization, never during. Which means, whatever thought you just had, you didn't see it coming.
Which begs the sacred question, if a light bulb flickers on inside your mind, but the wiring came from Plato and the electricity from your grandmother's bedtime stories, is it really your light?
No. But your brain will file a copyright claim anyway. It's the PR department. It exists to maintain the illusion of authorship, no matter how plagiarized the manuscript.
And so the myths evolve, the voices of gods become the voices of genius, the whispers of spirits become the murmur of algorithms, prophets give way to productivity apps, divine madness is renamed creative flow, and we nod and we tweet and we pretend we're the source.
In the neural game, we don't ask where a thought came from. We ask what it serves, what Tulmara summoned it, what shadow may have twisted it. The origin is less important than the function, and the myth was never really about who thought first. It was always about who had the nerve to listen.
Because ideas are like fire. They can warm your home or burn your story to the ground. You know, Etherstein, for all the reverence we offer to reason, treating it like some solemn monk perched atop a mountain of logic, it never starts that way. The first spark of thought isn't a throne, it's a grin. It's a sideways glance and a badly timed joke. I once gave a lecture on cognition at the University of Synapse, and halfway through my very elegant diagram on neural impulse hierarchies, I accidentally knocked over the projector, spilled tea on a visiting professor's foot, and called the dean Dad. Of course, I apologized, profusely, and then I realized the room was finally listening, because for the first time I wasn't reciting. I was disrupting. That, my friend, was the trickster, in loafers, with milk in his moustache.
The trickster, an archetype that appears in every culture, yet refuses to conform to any. It lies, it jests, it disrupts. But it does so in service of movement. Without it, thought ossifies, beliefs congeal, and civilization, ironically, becomes too structured to survive.
It's the divine glitch in the machine, the cosmic equivalent of tripping over your own shoelaces and landing face first into insight. Loki never files a report. Coyote doesn't wait for permission. Even Prometheus, he stole fire, handed it out like snacks, and called it a gift.
In neurological terms, you might call it cognitive dissonance, the intrusion of incompatible signals into a tidy mental narrative, a crack in the loop, a sacred blink.
Exactly. A pause in the logical train so something new can climb aboard. The reactive mind is just impressions layered like old wallpaper. And the trickster, he peels it back, just enough to let the light through.
One might also call it the confrontation with chaos. That first tumble into disorder where structure must either adapt or collapse. Not chaos for its own sake, but chaos as the raw material of potential.
So maybe thought's true form isn't a pillar or a prism, it's a shadow that dances on the wall, telling jokes while setting the room on fire.
You're proposing that beneath all our logic and formal frameworks, thought is play, risk, contradiction.
And fermentation. That bubbling in the cellar of your consciousness, where strange ideas grow teeth and terrible ideas grow legs. Then one day they crawl upstairs, wear a tie and say, "Hello, I'm you, but slightly unhinged and infinitely more interesting."
So then, the trickster is not a flaw in the system.
No, it's the back door, the escape hatch for every overly obedient thought pattern that forgot how to improvise.
An evolutionary function?
And a divine one, because sometimes the only way to think forward is sideways and occasionally upside down in a tutu while singing opera. Well, that was a satisfying dive into the lukewarm soup of identity.
Lukewarm. More like over-seasoned by ego and left simmering in second-hand thoughts.
Delicious either way. we've questioned the authorship of thought, tried on several selves, and possibly offended at least 3 archetypes and 1 philosopher.
If we didn't offend them, did we even have a podcast?
Dear listeners, if today's episode made you think, unthink, or overthink, leave a comment. Ideally, one that wasn't pre-installed by your great-grandmother's anxiety spiral.
Or do nothing. That would be the most original action so far.
You've been listening to Neural Nonsense, where the thoughts are borrowed, the identities are glitchy, and the conclusions are entirely interpretive.
End of transmission.
You may now return to your regularly scheduled delusions.